Good morning, everyone. Earlier in this week, I did a report on the latest with the Scott Peterson bid to get out of jail. He's still trying, and the LA Innocence Project has taken over his case. Let's recap that really quickly. Now, you guys will remember Scott Peterson. He was convicted of the murder of his wife, Lacey Peterson, and their unborn child. Back in January, the LA Innocence Project took on his case, which really made me perk up because I thought, oh my gosh, why? Why would they do that? This week, they've gone into court. I think this started on Monday. So apparently they think they've got a case. And what I want to go over here with you guys today is why he's back in court, what they've brought up. So let's get to it. When the LA Innocence Project took up his case, they asked for a few hearings. Judge Elizabeth Hill will make a ruling on DNA test at the last hearing. Hill ruled one piece of evidence can undergo DNA testing. That would be a piece of duct tape found on Lacey Peterson's pants after her body was pulled from the San Francisco Bay. Now, the judge denied testing on 13 other items in the defense's request. She will let the attorneys know which lab will do the DNA testing. The second matter on hand is something called a 1054.9. It's the California Penal Code about discovery evidence. The defense says that Peterson, a convicted killer serving a life sentence, is entitled to all of the prosecution's evidence, even if it wasn't presented during the trial. So 2 decades later, the defense wants all of it now. They've filed appeals and pushed for a new trial. The hearing started on Monday. Let's jump over to a news broadcast that came out last night as to what was going on in court, and hopefully this will kind of sum it all up for us.
For a second straight day, lawyers for the LA Innocence Project asked a judge to consider what they say is new evidence, including emails, photos, and other documents Peterson's defense believes could clear him of the murder conviction handed down nearly 20 years ago.
Clearly, if there's evidence that was not turned over that could have made a difference in this trial, that should be given to the Innocence Project to work with. But what we're seeing here is complete overhaul of the case. I don't think the judge is going to go that far.
Prosecutors and defense attorneys have agreed on a neutral lab to be used to conduct DNA testing on a piece of duct tape found on Lacey Peterson's pants. Now the judge must determine whether to consider additional evidence. The judge in the case says she will release a ruling on the evidence within the next 90 days.
Okay, so we have to wait 90 days. I just don't see what they found. Like, what is it that they've found that's gotten them to where they're like, okay, for the Innocence Project to pick up something, they have tons of people coming at them, wanting them to take their case. It just seems like they'd have to have something of solid, say, we've got to go after this. Okay, so that was me earlier in the week. And I promised you guys that I would kind of dive into this a little bit further. So see if we can figure out exactly what's going on. This was 1 month ago.
While a California judge largely denied requests made by Peterson's team to retest evidence for DNA last week, including parts of a mattress found in a burned out van near the Peterson home and a length of plastic string found tied in what they say was a bow around the neck of the unborn son, Connor, which was more likely just tangled.
So the judge did deny some big major key items in the case to be allowed back in.
A piece of duct tape that was found on Lacey's pants at the time of her autopsy. A portion of the tape was tested in 2003, was shown to have human DNA present, but the testing available at the time was not able to provide, quote, an acceptable quality to generate a profile. But the defense expected to request additional evidence than they were unable to find in the original trial files, including they're going to ask for evidence from the investigations into a December 2002 burglary of a home across the street from the Petersons' house, Lacey Peterson's missing watch, information on a van fire in the airport district near their home on December 25th, 2002, and documents.
So what are they going to do? They went in and requested basically all the evidence in the previous case, and now they're saying that no, she says, no, I'm not going to give you all the evidence. So now we have to go piece by piece. That's what it sounds like to me. They're going to sit here and spend all of this time going through each piece of evidence to see what the judge is going to allow and what the judge isn't going to allow. I guess they have to do it that way, but I don't know.
From interviews with several witnesses they could not locate in the files. Joining me now is John Buehler, former detective on the Scott Peterson case, and Lara Urezzi, an attorney who represented Scott Peterson in the case.
So when asked about the burned out van and the burglary across the street, this is what the previous investigator had to say about that.
I've heard that over the years, that they said the burglary wasn't investigated, and that's totally wrong. If all you have to do is look at the documents that came into court and thoroughly investigated. The guys copped to it. They were polygraphed on it. Property was recovered, and of all the property that was recovered, there was never one piece of property from any of the burglaries these guys were associated with that could be linked back to Lacey. And as far as the judge, deciding that, this duct tape needs to be retested, great, and actually I'm okay retesting anything. It doesn't really make any difference to me. Anything that might prove that he's innocent, if that's a possibility, which it doesn't seem like to me, should be done. But when you take a look at this duct tape and any of the debris that was found around the bodies, that's just what the stuff is. It's debris, and it may not even be associated with the bodies. It may have been found and recovered in the same area where they washed up on shore.
When Dan asked what was the most convincing evidence of his guilt, this is what he said.
His demeanor after we told him that Lacey and Scott had been confirmed dead through DNA, and then just several minutes later making his order at In-N-Out Burger for something to eat. The fact that he could just so cavalierly ask for a double with cheese and a small fry and a vanilla shake after he'd just been given this horrendous news convinced me that he was involved in it, because who does that? There were a lot of other things. Of course, Amber coming in, his claim that, is going to be the first Christmas without his wife, and, making the claim that she was missing before she was, things like that. It's just a whole bunch of circumstantial evidence that really weaved and painted a very vivid picture.
And the fact that he tried to run afterwards.
We told the court in 2013, when the defendant asked for the DNA testing of a hair fragment and a hair that was found on the tape in the leg of Lacey's body, we told the court that it was contaminated based on it being in the bay, being found at the dog park, the number of different hairs that were on there from dogs. And we were right then, and we're right now, when we are indicating that this is inappropriate for the defense to continue to try and find things to drag this case out.
So do you think they're just trying to drag it all out?
If his defense team is asking to get a number of items tested, and if the prosecution is so confident in their case, why object? Why try and prevent these items from being tested? That's the part that's mind-boggling to me, especially that the cost is not going to be on the state or the courts.
Oh, it's not?
It's something that is going to be paid by a grant that, the Los Angeles Innocence Project has.
Yeah, but that money could be used towards another person that is truly innocent. That's the problem with it. I guess that's where I'm stumped on this, is that how many people are sitting in jail right now that shouldn't be there, that these guys could be working on their case rather than Scott Peterson. Did the media convict this guy before he went to trial? If you were into true crime, even if you weren't into true crime back then, this was all over the news. You'd have to be living under a rock not to know that this guy was going to trial, that this all happened. I don't think there couldn't have been anything else going on in the world, because all of the news channels were all over it. It was close to the publicity that the OJ trial got. It really was.
And a lot of exonerating evidence has come forth to give reason for a lot of this testing. And I'm hoping that soon, once once the discovery motion is heard, more evidence can be heard and come out and give more credence to some of the arguments that they had for the DNA testing. And maybe they'll come back with a motion for reconsideration.
You mentioned a lot of exonerating evidence has come out. I haven't seen any of that, right? I mean, what is the
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, what's come out? Nothing new has happened.
actual evidence that's come out that is exonerating?
I think the one key thing that is, let's call it the elephant in the room, is the Medina burglary. The prosecution theory was that the Medina burglary occurred on the 26th, December 26th, 2 days after Lacey's disappearance. But in reality, evidence points to the idea that it actually did occur on the 24th, the morning of Lacey's disappearance. We've got the mail that these burglars claimed that they saw the morning of the burglary, and we know that the mail was picked up the morning of the 24th. if in reality, if this burglary happened the morning of Laci's disappearance, imagine the jury hearing that evidence and the impact that would have had on them. A bunch of guys who were burglarizing their home and being confronted by a pregnant woman versus the husband who went on a fishing trip to the Bay. I think they would have given it a lot more thought than what they did here.
Well, I can't disagree with her on that, but the fact remains there was no witnesses that saw Laci scream and yelling. There was an argument taking place. She was fighting to not be thrown in a van. There wasn't her dog barking and things like that. And although Laura gets, part of it right, there are a couple of things that came in here. The burglary occurred over 2 days. The first day, when one of the burglars went in the house on the 25th, he couldn't take all the property he wanted. They returned on the 26th. By that time, the media was out in front. They even noticed and remarked about the media out there, not sure exactly what they were doing at the time. They weren't aware of apparently what was taking place with the Petersons. So when you take a look at these things, then you also have to run into the logical conclusion. If they did abduct her, why didn't they just leave her on the beach there, by Berkeley Marina? Why did they put her in the water and weigh her down? Because that's what the evidence supports. The missing limbs, the decomposition of the body, not being located for between 3 and 6 months, or 3 and 4 months, I think is what the prosecution forensic pathologist said is her time in the water. All these things. You're not going to put steps forward to hide a body if you're trying to frame somebody. You're going to leave it on the shore.
Yeah, but that's just an opinion. That's their opinion. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm trying to look at both sides of this, and I just don't know. I don't see it.
I got to agree with Laura on a couple other things as far as testing the evidence. Test anything they want. If there's a possibility that it is going to help Scott, go ahead and do it. I'm confident it's not going to happen.
But Detective Beeler, what you're forgetting is, in this case, we have Diane Jackson, the neighbor who actually saw men dragging out a safe and a van that was outside of the Medina's house on the 24th. That in itself is huge. Early on, you mentioned about how, the demeanor, Scott Peterson's demeanor. And I heard that also from the juror who was on this jury that convicted Scott Peterson. People behave in different ways. I've seen parents who have lost children who are in complete shock, and what they do is laugh and smile and tell jokes with people. Does that mean that they don't care? It's just that people behave in different ways. And in this case, yes, people focus on Scott's behavior versus the evidence. In fact, the lack of evidence. There was no forensic evidence connecting Scott to the crime whatsoever. This idea that the burglars, how come the body ended up at the Berkeley Marina? Well, everybody in the world knew Scott had been at the Berkeley Marina and at the Bay. And of course they were going to do that. What else would they do? Anybody with a hair.
Okay, but she just contradicted herself. She says they may not have even known about the burglary. They may not have even known about what was going on over at the Peterson house, because when they got there to do the return to steal even more, they found all the news crews out there. These guys were brought in and questioned. But now she's saying, but they disposed of her body to make it look like he did it. So did they know or did they not know?
Any type of brain, the smallest brain, would realize that the right thing to do to make sure that the person who's being suspected of the crime gets in trouble for this and gets arrested is to dump the body at the San Francisco Bay.
Gosh, I could do a whole program with you, Laura, on this stuff. A couple real quick corrections for you on that. The burglary on the 25th, he only could take the property that he took. And one of the things that came up on that is Diane Jackson. I don't believe she was ever called as a defense witness in this. So if her evidence was so relevant, I'm
because
curious
she was
as
hypnotized.
to why your team didn't bring her in. Also, when we originally talked to her, I think her description of the van went from white to tan to brown. And so we had so many discrepancies with this. And in addition to that, she didn't know Laci before this event took place. And there's a big difference between somebody who knows a neighbor by sight and by facial recognition and a neighbor that maybe saw something and could confuse her easily with somebody else. But the fact that Jackson said she saw these guys bringing the safe out on the 25th, well, that's not true.
Well, the reason that we didn't bring, she wasn't allowed to testify is because your team or the prosecution had her hypnotized, and for that reason, her testimony could not come in. And I believe one of the detectives testified as far as what she had seen.
Wait, John, the reason she wasn't allowed to testify was because she was hypnotized?
Well, I don't remember her being hypnotized. I remember one of the detectives
she was hypnotized.
did what I think he called a cognitive interview with her. And I don't remember the term hypnotized coming in on it. At least this is the first time I've heard that. I think the term that they used was a cognitive interview that they did on her. But regardless on that, if her information is solid and if there's other exculpatory evidence that supports it, bring her in.
I don't know. I don't really think that does a whole lot. Now, back in 2004, Scott Peterson's parents swore of his innocence. Let's listen to what they said.
He had no temper, Barbara.
He's got my temperament. I don't get angry. I get hurt or sad.
He was too good to believe, almost. I swear, we never had to swat the kid or anything, ever.
Okay, well, maybe that's the problem. Sounds like his parents are enablers.
Called us at 7 a.m. in the morning when she took the test. And I said, how do you know? And she said, I took the test. They tried for 3 years to have a child. We were all putting our hand on the baby's stomach. Scott was trying to find it for us so we could feel it kick. And they were just ecstatic. The phone rang. I answered it, and Scott was sobbing on the phone, and all I could hear was Lacey and Miss, and I thought she'd miscarried. And he told me she was missing.
How are you doing personally? How are you holding up to all this? This is a lot.
Strain, obviously, so. Let him rally, Scott.
He showed emotion, but he didn't cry 24 hours a day. He cried privately. He worked at trying to find her. He tried to keep us up, because we were breaking down too, so he'd try to be brave for us.
It's just not in him. It is just not in him. I've never seen him mad. The only time I've seen him mad is if he misses a golf shot. He might get a little mad. That's
At himself.
That's it,
Yeah.
at himself, yeah.
They had a very good marriage. They backed each other up all the way. It was like it was them, and we were all outsiders.
I think it's just another one of these cases where when she got pregnant, he started panicking because he realized that he was in it. They probably got married way too young. And we see it all the time in the crime world where the husband or the boyfriend has the pregnant girlfriend or wife done in.
Amber, did you know that Scott was a married man?
It was surprising.
I'm curious as to what you guys think about Amber. What are your thoughts on her? I truly believe she had no idea that he was married. I think over the years, we've kind of realized that she actually was the hero in this case, coming forward like she did, because she didn't have to. She didn't have to get up there and do anything in the news. She could have just stuck with, she could have stayed out of it. Of course, the police probably would have interviewed her anyway. It would have come out once they found out about her, but she didn't have to get up there and try to justify what she was doing. She didn't have to do that. She was a victim in this too. And here's the thing. Once a cheater, always a cheater. It's so true, you guys. It is so true.
It was surprising. It was disappointing. But it's certainly not anything that's extraordinary. We were shocked. We were
disappointed.
Unhappy. I mean, that's the reality of life. Men have affairs. Women have affairs. And you have to understand he was virtually run out of town.
Scott, any comment?
You got a second? Scott? It's Scott?
He had media following him,
Have you taken a polygraph test?
hounding him every day. He had shock jocks lined up in front of his house with bullhorns, screaming murderer. And
His
he
friends.
couldn't live in his home because of all the media presence. He became a homeless man, living out of a car. He really did. He literally became a nomad.
Okay, now let's go back since we're revisiting everything. Well, this was uploaded 5 years ago.
That's been absolutely terrible, as it is for everyone. I mean, you see us in press conference. You haven't seen me as much in the media, but you see our families and the raw emotion that's out there and the grief, the frustration. For me, it comes at different times during the day. 2 weeks ago, I knew exactly what to do. I'd go to the volunteer center at the Red Lion and open up the center and wait for the volunteers to come and work on things.
I know when I approached you on Amber Fry, and I told you that I would be reporting that you had a girlfriend.
Right.
Your response to me is that you had no comment either way.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you just come clean then?
I'm glad you asked the question. It simply, wasn't appropriate to comment on it. And unfortunately, there has been a statement in the press that I denied it, which was made with another reporter when I characterized a National Enquirer article as a pack of lies. And I did so without reading the article, unfortunately.
You know what? I don't want to listen to him talk, because we listened to him talk back when all this happened, and he's not likable. It doesn't make him guilty, but it also doesn't make him innocent. I think the eye-opening thing on all this was when they were at the news conference and he is caught calling Amber Fry, lying to her about what's going on, like just keeping up the whole ruse with her. Yeah, we're celebrating New Year's, da da da. Like, that's probably what did it in for her. She was like, really? You think I'm that dumb? If she'd have been one of those women that was just so into him, like if she was, I'm not going to say desperate women, because it's not necessarily desperate woman, but if she had been one of those women that out of her feelings for him was willing to look the other way, so to speak, they may have never gotten as far as they did with this investigation. I think she broke open so many things for them. All right, so in this news report, we've got NBC Bay Area. They're examining the legal challenge that's up ahead for what they're trying to do with this Innocence project. So let's watch this.
Joining us are attorneys Paula Canny and Dean Johnson. They've tracked this case since it started. Also, our NBC Bay Area reporter Jody Hernandez joins us. She interviewed Scott Peterson back when it all began.
Convicted killer Scott Peterson is hoping to get a whole new trial. Here's what to know about the winding road that's brought him back to court. And Scott Peterson said everything seemed fine when he left their house that morning. Prosecutors say he told a neighbor he went to play golf, but he actually came here to the Berkeley Marina, where he later told police he went fishing in a little aluminum boat that his family never even knew he had. But a month later, the story took an unexpected turn.
Scott told me he was not married.
Meet Amber Fry.
We did have a romantic relationship.
Prosecutors say Peterson told her he'd lost his wife and was spending his first Christmas alone, even though at the time, Lacey was still very much alive. By March, police had ruled it a homicide. And then in April,
the body is an adult female.
It was here, just a few miles from where Peterson went fishing, that the bodies of Lacey and her unborn son washed ashore separately. Police identified the bodies and then went looking for Peterson. They found him near San Diego with dyed hair and a goatee and a big wad of cash.
Cold case of people versus Scott V. Peterson.
Back at Modesto, Peterson pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of murder and hired a defense lawyer with a long list of celebrity clients. But the case had already gotten so much attention that a judge ruled Peterson couldn't get a fair trial in his hometown. There was national news coverage, TV specials, and in February, a Lifetime movie, The Perfect Husband, The Lacey Peterson Story, starring Dean Cain as Scott Peterson. So the case moved here to San Mateo County, and in June 2004, the trial began. 2 jurors were thrown out for misconduct, and a third left over arguments in the jury room. One of the replacements was Rochelle Nice, who became known as the Strawberry Shortcake juror. On November 12th, they delivered the verdict. They found Peterson guilty of first-degree murder in the death of his wife, Lacey, and second-degree murder for his baby son, Connor. In March, by the jury's unanimous recommendation, Peterson was sentenced to death, even though police never found a crime scene or a murder weapon. 16 years later, he was brought back to that very same courthouse. You see, the California Supreme Court took up his case and decided that the judge had overstepped his authority by excluding jurors who were against the death penalty. Peterson was resentenced to life in prison without parole. A year later, his next appeal centered around that juror, Rochelle Nice, who it turns out wasn't fully honest in jury selection. She didn't disclose that she had recently filed a restraining order against someone who threatened her while she was pregnant, something that could have disqualified her from the jury. A judge heard the case, but ruled that it wasn't enough to get Peterson a new trial. And that brings us back to the present.
Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Can you both see and hear the proceedings, sir?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
This is Scott Peterson today, 51 years old, appearing remotely from a prison outside Sacramento.
We are eager to get our investigation underway.
His new lawyers are from the Los Angeles Innocence Project, a 2-year-old nonprofit that works with the Forensic Science Institute at Cal State LA. They're hoping to retry the case by finding new DNA evidence. They asked for samples from a burned out van with a bloody mattress inside, found after a burglary near the Petersons' house. And they want to test the clothing and debris that surfaced along with the bodies.
The defense was entitled to those at the time of trial.
But so far, the only new DNA test a judge has allowed is a single piece of duct tape found on Laci Peterson's pants during the autopsy. Now, all this time, Scott Peterson has maintained he's innocent, but this could be his last chance to show there's reasonable doubt about whether he's guilty.
Well, that was a good update. Kind of brings us back to what all happened. I've forgotten a lot of that stuff already.
Why would the LA Innocence Project even take up this case?
Well, you know, the Innocence Project has always been all about DNA technology. They started after the O.J. Simpson case. They thought that they could use DNA to maybe clear, at the time, 3 or 4 people who were on death row. Since that time, they've cleared over 100 people. And this is a case where there are minute and old DNA samples that may very well place Laci Peterson in a place where she couldn't be if Scott Peterson had killed her.
Right.
And may also identify possible suspects.
So, Paula, do you think there's substance here?
Oh, there's absolutely substance. But I also want to clarify, this Innocence Project is the Los Angeles Innocence Project, not Barry Scheck's Innocence Project, which Barry Scheck, originally was like, hey, that's not mine. But it's super interesting because, like Dean was saying, if Laci's DNA shows up on anything related to the Medina burglary, like the mattress, like the duct tape, any of those things, it basically means that the prosecution's theory was absolutely wrong, and that Laci probably wasn't killed by Scott Peterson, but by the Medina burglars, which has always been the defense's contention. The LA Innocence Project is also arguing that the district attorney's office didn't turn over a bunch of materials that, under constitutional law per Brady v. Maryland, they should have done that. So there are lots and lots and lots of issues. And I think anybody now that looks back at that trial, that was insane. It was insane that a case that complicated was tried so soon after the arrest. I mean, and to put all that material together, don't you think it would have taken
more
long
time? You think?
Absolutely.
But the thing is here is that this judge is not allowing all this DNA to be, sampled there. Not the mattress, not the burned out van, but that piece of duct tape that was found on Laci's body.
I understand the judge's reasoning. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think if there's DNA there, given the advances in technology, that there should be a chance at a retest. I mean, what have you got to lose?
Right.
But there is this item number 9, which is a piece of duct tape, which supposedly has DNA samples on it. And the judge has specifically found that this could be material to identifying the perpetrator and the length of time that the victim actually lived. When the trial happened, we heard a little bit about the so-called Medina burglary, which happened across the street from Laci's house. We heard a little bit about a van that was supposedly associated with the burglary, but we heard barely the tip of the iceberg. That was not the whole story by any means.
Right.
So now we're at a point where if the DNA sampling comes back in some way positive, game over.
Right.
Scott Peterson,
so he could possibly be found innocent.
He walks
eventually.
Out the door.
Well, he doesn't. I mean, it's the judicial process is invested in preserving convictions. So it isn't that easy, even if other DNA, exonerating DNA, makes itself available. It's not like, oh, okay, he walks out of prison.
Right.
There's more motions and more motions and more motions.
It is a long process here. That
super long, super complicated. And the other thing about this burglary that goes to this Brady issue is that the trial, the prosecution was saying that burglary was December 26th.
In reality, the burglary was December 24th.
So there's some dates mixed up here too.
Huge.
There's a lot to cover.
Yep.
All right. So what do you guys think? I want to hear what your comments are. And by the way, I read most of my comments, not all of them, but most of them. I do try to get to as many as I possibly can. I'm curious though what y'all think about this. Is this a waste of time? And somebody else sitting in jail is innocent that's being pushed to the side because their case isn't as popular as this one. That's the part that troubles me. And that's where I feel like they're using the publicity of this case to move it forward. But it seems to me that this judge is like, she's not going to put up with a lot of crap. And I do like that about her. If he's innocent, why wasn't there something that came out during the trial that really made us all go, wait a minute, he could be innocent? There wasn't. There was none of that. And they didn't talk about it back then.
Jody, you had just started with NBC Bay Area. You were sent down to Modesto to cover this case. What was it like in the beginning? It actually took some work to get that sit-down interview.
Yeah, it took a lot of work. Well, it was a huge story. You know, it all started during the holidays. It was a slow time. And so when a beautiful, pregnant, young woman went missing, it was big news. It captured our attention. And I was the new kid on the block. I had just started earlier that month. And so, of course, I was working Christmas and Christmas Eve. And so I got the story, and pretty much that was all I did for the next couple of years.
You covered that story extensively because you were at, when she first disappeared, there were candlelight vigils. You talked to her parents. You talked to Scott Peterson himself. It took a while to even get that interview.
Right. It took a lot of time. And we were seeing him every day. I was talking to him on the phone every day. In fact, during the trial, it came out that we had like over 100 phone calls. So we actually were the first ones to get sound with Scott Peterson. We cornered him outside the volunteer center and got him to say a few words about the search, and it was a huge deal at that time because he hadn't spoken at all. I also really distinctly remember New Year's Eve, the vigil, standing next to Scott Peterson in the audience while Lacey's family was on the stage, Scott's family was on the stage, but he wouldn't get up there, and we all thought it was really, really strange. Of course, we didn't know about Amber Frey.
You guys think that he didn't get up there because he didn't want Amber to see him on the news? Which, if that was the case, I mean, that just even shows even more guilt, because if he was like, oh, she's the one, I found the one, I don't want to be with Lacey anymore, you have another Chris Watts situation where he's going to do away with his previous life so that he can move forward with this new life.
That was a moment. That press conference, by then, we had the entire national press out here. Everybody was here, and they said there was a press conference. I remember the room. It was packed, and Amber Frey then came out, and you could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet as we listened to her every word with our jaws dropped. And it was definitely a turning point in the whole case. And up until then, Lacey's family, her mother, Sharon Rocha, her brother, Brent, they were all in Scott's corner. I mean, they were all part of a team looking for Lacey. They loved him. They believed in him. But once Amber Frey came out,
everything changed.
Everything changed.
It was a time of Blackberries. And you still have yours.
This is a BlackBerry. The station gave me this BlackBerry, and you know, it was a really, it was a rare.
The sad thing is, there's somebody out there watching this right now that's going, "What was a BlackBerry?" I loved BlackBerries. I'm sorry.
Case, we covered it every single day. We never do that anymore in court cases.
Right.
And so they gave me this BlackBerry. I got really good at typing with my thumbs.
It's a little worn.
Yep.
It's very worn. And it was like play by play.
So where are some of the notable people besides Scott Peterson? Amber Frey, Scott's girlfriend, who at the time didn't know he was married, reportedly still lives in Fresno. She published a book, Witness for the Prosecution of Scott Peterson. According to her social media account, she's now an ambassador for the pre-workout supplement and energy drink company. Rochelle Nice, a juror in the original trial, also referred to during the trial as Strawberry Shortcake, is still here in the Bay Area. She wrote a book about the case with other jurors, previously denying that her personal experiences influenced her during the trial. Janie Peterson, Scott Peterson's sister-in-law, is helping with Scott's challenge. She's currently living in San Diego County and even attended law school, but is not a licensed attorney. So how did the court of public opinion really set the tone for this trial, do you think?
Well, it certainly set the tone outside the courtroom. I mean, the publicity was unbelievable. There were people parading billboards, Scott Peterson, killer, and so on. And it was a zoo outside. But, over the years, I've actually talked to, I think, 11 of the 12 jurors. And it's interesting what they had to say. They had no idea what was going on outside.
Which is the way it should be.
Yeah, which is exactly the way it should be. And in fact, they all told me sort of the same thing. They had the judge's jury instructions, which tell them how to decide a case and, what the law is. They had it right in the middle of their jury table, and they called that the Bible. And anytime they had a question about, well, how do we do this? How do we decide this question?
They'd refer to the Bible.
The instructions. And I can tell you that if this case had been tried differently, if it had been presented in a different way, if there had been a coherent theory of the defense that had been capable of raising a reasonable doubt, those jurors might have gone a different way.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and there was nothing like, I think, the extensive press coverage that came on this, as opposed to other trials.
No, it was unbelievable. And that's interesting. I mean, I've been up to that jury room. I mean, as I recall, the jury wasn't sequestered during testimony.
Sure.
So I'm having a tough time believing that they weren't impacted. It was like television truck after television truck after. It was crazy. And it had its own energy. It clearly had its own energy. So that by the time that Scott was found guilty, I mean, that entire area was filled with people cheering, and that was weird. And then there's a break, and then there's the penalty phase, and then when the jury votes for guilty, and in each instance, I believe the jury was sequestered, that is, kept in hotels during deliberations, that time they might not have known. But even then, they drove in vans back and forth. There were the crowds. But remember, those crowds were out there like, yay, he's killed.
They were cheering. They had signs. It was a zoo out there. So let me ask you then, did the guilty verdict surprise you?
What surprised me was the way the case was argued. I mean, because the prosecution's argument was more like a defense argument, and the defense's argument was more like a prosecution's argument. So the energy of the case sort of surprised me, given all that had transpired and how much people were hating on Scott, especially because of Amber Frey. I wasn't surprised by it. No, were you?
No, the guilty verdict didn't surprise me at all. In fact, when it was announced that there was a verdict, I remember that my reporter stuck a microphone in my face, and before we went on air, the reporter said, "What do you think the verdict's going to be?" And I said, "He's going to be found guilty." And she literally took a step back. Yeah, it was very clear from the evidence, the way it was presented. The fact that the prosecution had numerous experts, the fact that defense experts literally fell apart on the stand, that this was the only way this was going to go. But what we didn't know at the time were all the problems with that evidence, and those are huge. And if the jury had a complete picture, there would have been enough reasonable doubt in this case to drive a truck through.
Could have been very, very different.
Well, right.
We all remember that day. So
But the other thing people forget is that jury deliberation itself was super challenged because Rochelle Neese was an alternate. There were multiple jurors that were excused, and rather than excusing the bullying jury, Judge DeLucchi excused the person who was bullied.
Many layers. So many layers. Why do you think this case has stayed in the public eye?
Well, this case was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, it's hard to imagine this kind of interest being generated by any case now. But the thing about this particular case is it was the perfect news story. We had the symbolism was almost ineluctable. You have a woman great with child disappearing on Christmas Eve, and then everybody hears about that. And that's the story throughout the relatively slow holiday news season. And then as I learned, as I was beginning to do media, people start to lose interest, but then you rekindle that interest. All of a sudden, Scott Peterson, the bereaved spouse, has an affair, and here's Amber Fry.
Like we say, so many layers, like an onion coming off here.
People start to lose interest, and all of a sudden, the bodies wash up on the bay, and yes, it's Laci. People start to lose interest again, in the story, and Scott Peterson is fleeing to Mexico.
Right, there's always a layer of it.
Always a cycle and a cycle and a cycle, and it was always refreshing itself in the minds of the public, and it was and remains.
And it remains.
Do y'all remember when the news helicopters were flying over the area where they had discovered the body? And although they had not technically said it was her, we all knew it was.
A scrap of bloody fabric.
It was one of those hair standing up on the back of your neck moments.
A burnt out van.
In my professional opinion, this van was burned to cover up a crime.
Alleged sightings.
What about the witnesses who said they had seen Laci Peterson after she went missing?
All detailed in a new bombshell court filing by the Innocence Project.
Yeah, so is what they're looking for enough to be doing all this? I guess they're dead set on he was done wrong. And it's only going to be a matter of time, but it's going to take a while for all this to play out because as we see, they're having to go piece by piece. So it's just one for us to watch, I guess. I would say this, though. What if they did, if they did find something and they come back and say, he was wrongfully convicted? I think so many of us out here would be shocked. Be shocked. But what's heartbreaking in all of this is that you now have the family of Laci Peterson, who had put this to bed, having to relive all this over again. And if he is guilty, if he did do this, then once again, he just keeps slapping that family in the face. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and feel free to leave a comment. Have a blessed day.